Berlin, midnight. Her racket has not left her hand. Her hands will not stop shaking. Minutes earlier, Alex Eala had beaten the world no-2. Not a journeyman, not a feel-good wildcard story. Elena Rybakina, two-time Grand Slam finalist, fresh off winning this year's Australian Open. The scoreline read 7-5, 6-4. On camera, still catching her breath, Eala said it herself, "I'm still shaking. And I was shaking on match point too." She called her father from a hallway outside the locker room. What came back, by every account, was a lot of screaming on both ends of the line. 11 days later, Eala walks into the biggest tournament of her career, Wimbledon, as a seeded player for the first time in her life. You don't need to follow Philippine sports to know what that shake in her hands means. Every athlete who has ever stood one match away from the level they've dreamed about has felt it. So here's the question worth sitting with for the next 9 minutes. Does that shake help her at the biggest moments? Or does it eventually catch up with her? London, the All-England club isn't even fully built out yet. The draw ceremony is Friday, June 26th. The tournament begins Monday, June 29th, which means, as of right now, nobody, not Eala, not her coaches, not the broadcasters already cutting her highlight reel, knows who she plays first. What is confirmed, on June 22nd, the WTA released its latest rankings, and Eala's name sat at no. 31 spot inside the line that determines Wimbledon's 32 seeds. She is the no 29 seed. The first time in her career she's been seeded at a Grand Slam. The first time any Filipino has been seeded in singles at a major in the Open era. The hard number behind that sentence, 1,557 ranking points, her total on the day the rankings froze for Wimbledon's seeding list. Built almost entirely on 5 weeks of grass. A Duta 125 title in Birmingham, a run to the Berlin Open semifinals, back-to-back wins over Rybakina and world no 8 Elena Svitolina. The human detail, this week, before any of that mattered, Eala is playing doubles at the Bad Homburg Open, partnered with Venus Williams, a 46-year-old who won her first Wimbledon title before Eala was born, standing across the net from opponents barely older than that gap itself. But here's what nobody noticed underneath the seeding headlines. The same 5 weeks that built Eala's ranking also exposed exactly the kind of player who can end her run before the second week even starts. Ask former Tour pro John Isner what makes Eala dangerous on grass. And he doesn't bring up her serve, it isn't one of the tour's biggest. He talks about movement. She could be someone to look out for at Wimbledon, Isner said, pointing to how smaller, left-handed players often read this surface better than bigger hitters expect. Sam Querrey, watching from the outside, points somewhere else what happens after the win. He said it looks like she's just won the entire tournament every time she takes down a ranked opponent, and that the emotion itself is the most watchable part of her game. Tennis journalist Ben Rothenberg, who's covered her grass run up close, frames it differently again. He calls Eala one of the most followed players in tennis by several measures, a fan base built around a Southeast Asian diaspora that, until this season, rarely saw her results travel beyond home audiences. Here's the stat that backs up all three. Eala enters Wimbledon with a 9-3 record on grass this year, the best surface-specific record of her career. On the one surface where being undersized and left-handed stops being a disadvantage and starts being a weapon. A tour legend, an active pro, and a journalist who covers her closely 3 different angles. And none of them are saying it because they're Filipino. They're saying it because the tape backs it up. So what's actually standing between Eala and a deep Wimbledon run? It isn't her ranking. It isn't her draw, which doesn't even exist yet. It's a name. Iva Jovic. 2 meetings with Jovic in 2026. 2 losses, both in straight sets, 6-4, 6-2 at the French Open in May, then 6-2, 6-2 at Queen's Club 2 weeks later. Jovic is 18, ranked no. 19, and built almost entirely around taking the racket out of Eala's hands before a rally develops. The two are close friends off the court. Jovic has said, "We practice together a ton," which is exactly the problem. Familiarity hasn't produced an answer. It's produced a pattern. The second piece is physical, and Eala has said it herself. Asked how she prepares for bigger, stronger opponents, she answered plainly, "I'm in the process of still getting stronger, right? That's not false modesty." Her wins over Rybakina and Svitolina both required out-returning power, not matching it, a strategy that works brilliantly until she runs into someone who pairs power with the same return discipline Jovic already has. And there's a scheduling problem hiding in plain sight. Eala played 3 matches in 4 days to reach the Berlin semifinal, lost that semifinal to Linda Noskova, then lost her very next match 2 days later, the Bad Homburg first round, to Elise Mertens in straight sets. A short turnaround, a tired body, a clean 2-set exit. Wimbledon's draw runs 7 rounds. If Eala goes deep, she will hit exactly this kind of letdown match at some point, and whoever's on the other side of the net won't need a top 10 ranking to take advantage of it. That is what makes the next few minutes and the rest of this story so important. Here's what I want to know from you. Be specific. Pick a round. Does Eala reach the second week at Wimbledon round of 16 or better? Or does a flat, return-heavy opponent end her run before that, the way Jovic has twice already this year? Drop your round prediction below. I'm reading every one before Friday's draw. Zoom out past the Philippines for a second, because this story doesn't actually belong to one country. The last time a Southeast Asian player was seeded in singles at a Grand Slam was 2009 Thailand's Tamarine Tanasugarn at the Australian Open. 17 years between seedings for an entire region of the tennis map. That's not a small gap. That's roughly the length of an entire career. It gets narrower inside the Philippines itself. The only other Filipino ever seeded at a major in the Open era is Treat Huey, and only in doubles, where he partnered Max Mirny to a Wimbledon semifinal in 2016 before retiring in 2023. Eala is doing this alone, in singles, on the sport's biggest stage, at 21. If you don't follow tennis and none of those names mean anything to you, here's a comparison that might. The closest parallel in Philippine sports isn't another tennis player, it's Manny Pacquiao, a single athlete who, for a country with a thin pipeline in his sport, became the reason an entire nation rearranged its schedule to watch him fight. That's the gravity Eala is starting to carry in tennis, in a country where the sport barely has competitive infrastructure to begin with. And it isn't only a Philippine story being amplified by Filipino media. Former British no-1 Greg Rusetsky, with no national stake in this at all, has said plainly that wherever she plays, the crowds are huge, pointing to traveling support that follows her from city to city regardless of round or ranking. That's the part international viewers should sit with. You don't need to know who Eala is yet to recognize what's happening. A result that would be a solid week for most players on tour is, for an entire diaspora, the loudest thing happening in their sport all year. Wimbledon hasn't even drawn its bracket, and the noise is already building. Berlin, midnight, her hands were still shaking. That shake, the one from beating Rybakina, wasn't nerves about a missed opportunity. It was her body catching up to a result her brain hadn't processed yet. Now we know what came right after it. A letdown loss to Mertens 2 days later, and 2 losses to Jovic, already sitting on the 2026 ledger before Wimbledon even starts. So here's the prediction. Eala reaches the 3rd round. Her seeding buys her that against unseeded opponents, but the run stops cold the moment she draws a flat, return first player built like Jovic. Not because she isn't good enough, because that specific puzzle hasn't been solved once, not this entire season. Drop your round prediction below. I want to see how many of you had her going further than that before this video, and how many after. This channel exists for exactly this, the Filipino tennis movement, covered with the same rigor you'd give any contender, not just the celebration after.